In the quiet town of Arlington, Indiana, a place where everybody knows everybody, a chilling mystery surrounding a missing 17-year-old girl was about to unravel. The girl is a bright and vivacious teenager who's deeply loved by her friends, her family, and the entire town, and her name is Valerie. She mysteriously vanished. Let's dig into this rabbit hole and figure out what happened to Valerie Tindall. Well, hey everybody, welcome to Profiling Evil in this episode. Now please, take a moment and hit that like and subscribe button. Make sure you're ringing that bell so you get all of our notifications, and please, folks, consider sharing Profiling Evil with your friends. Now, for more than 5 months, the people of Arlington, Indiana wondered what happened to 17-year-old Valerie Tindall. Her family tried everything. They spoke to everybody. The town, frankly, in part, was gripped with fear, with confusion and unanswered questions. Everybody, including her caring part-time boss, came to the Valerie Tindall home to console her inconsolable parents on the night she disappeared. Now, Valerie Tindall was an outgoing teenager who loved being with family and friends. In fact, she was in a great mood on June 7th in 2023 as she headed out the door, saying goodbye to her father. In fact, his last memory of this teenager was her big smile as she climbed into her green Honda Accord and drove off. Now, some reports say she said she was going to work, others just to goof around. Valerie had a part-time landscaping job working for her neighbor, a guy named Patrick Scott. Now, she wasn't scheduled to work that day, so her father assumed that she was just heading out to be with some friends. She mowed lawns as part of his landscaping business. In a report that was filed by the local police department, it was learned that Valerie drove her car from her home in nearby Shelbyville down to the South High apartments that were located across the street from Shelby High School. It was there that she apparently met her employer, Patrick Scott, who was in the apartment complex working on a project there. Now, by way of the crow's flight, it was about 15 miles from her home, so something that would have likely taken her 20 to 30 minutes to make the trip. Let's take a moment and just retrace her steps on this map. So if we were to follow Valerie Tindall's movements that particular day, we know that she left her home in Arlington, Indiana, and drove down to Shelbyville High School, and then the South High apartments, which I believe are these apartments right here. Now, the thing that's so interesting here is, again, this is probably 15 plus miles. Once you start having the back roads and others, it could be even a little longer than that. But it would have taken at least 20 to 30 minutes to make this drive. Well, it's unknown why Valerie was meeting Scott at that location. Perhaps she was expecting to get paid for work that she'd performed. We just don't know why she was going there. But what we do know is that Scott somehow convinced Valerie to climb into his vehicle and travel back to his home. Now, I don't know about you, but this just doesn't make sense that Valerie would leave her car behind simply to travel back to his home, which just happened to be a few doors away from the home in which Valerie lives. So why on earth would she make that drive? And why on earth would they head back to that house? You know, this leaves me wondering if she climbed into his vehicle thinking they were heading somewhere else, maybe like heading to a cafe for lunch or something. But regardless, Scott had other plans that included apparently going to his home, a place where I believe he would have had more control over Valerie and would have kept her more isolated, giving him more anonymity at the time. You see, Scott's wife and family weren't at home at that time, And so the pair traveled to that house, arriving somewhere around 1 p.m. Now, 7 minutes before they arrived at Scott's home, Valerie's phone was used for the last time to get some social media. Her phone recorded her location here on this map in the 1300 block north, 725 west. She leaves her vehicle here at the apartments and from there travels back to Patrick Scott's home. Now, again, does that make sense to you that she would travel back? In fact, if we were to look at that route just to get a little sense of the area again, let's put that route up here for a second and look at the route in its entirety. Again, would she drive down there if the plan was to go back to his house and have some kind of encounter like he's suggesting that she wanted to do? And it really makes me wonder what on earth she was doing there and why he had her there. Now, from there, things get interesting because, as indicated in his confession, they travel back from the Shelbyville High and South High apartments back to Patrick Scott's residence. But along the way, her phone is used one last time for some social media stuff. So again, what I want to do is just zoom out enough for you to see the number of cell towers around there, because the accuracy of that location is going to be incumbent upon the signal strength in each of those towers and the triangulation that was used to get there. But once that last cellular ping happens, she ends up inside of Patrick Scott's home here, where, according to Scott, she attempts to seduce him. So what happened next remained a mystery for 5 months, almost 6 months in total. When Valerie didn't return home that night, her parents got concerned and they started calling friends, family, the police department, and they called their daughter's employer, Patrick Scott, their neighbor. Now, Scott and his wife went to Valerie's home immediately after getting the call, and they appeared equally concerned, or at least Patrick Scott's wife seemed concerned. They consoled the family. They spent quite a bit of time there. Police say that Valerie's family was a little uneasy about Patrick Scott's relationship with their daughter, and they brought this up to the attention of the police. Scott, on the other hand, assured police that he hadn't even seen Valerie on the day she disappeared. But investigators felt like he was being just a little bit evasive, especially when they pushed and pressed him a little bit, asking him if he knew where Tindall might be. Well, it wasn't long before police discovered evidence that proved that Scott wasn't being truthful about seeing her that day. And when questioned, he changed his story. And he advised the police that he had actually driven Tindall to meet an unknown boy that she liked in Homer, Indiana. Now, Homer is only about 3.5 miles south of Scott and Tindall's home and the neighborhood they lived in. You can see it here on the map. So when Scott was re-interviewed by police a few days later, he was advised that his story wasn't adding up. Scott then adjusted his story slightly by saying that he actually dropped Valerie off at the boy's home or in his neighborhood in Homer, and then he returned to work at the South High Apartments. When he finished the day and returned to the area where he dropped Valerie off, he said she wasn't around. Now, Scott indicated that Tindall was afraid of her father, and he started laying this groundwork, something that we see happen a lot, where they start throwing other people under the bus. He said Tindall's father was abusive and that she probably ran away to get away from him. Well, police were so troubled by Scott's comments and the behaviors that they sought and received a number of search warrants. At first, they obtained warrants on the mobile devices that were used by Tindall and by Scott. The search also included looking into Scott's internet activities, and they made note that many of the applications on his phone had been deactivated at the time Tindall disappeared. But there was one problem. Scott forgot to disable a health app on his phone, and that recorded his activities, especially some significant activity around 1:35 p.m. that same day. Again, about 35 minutes after he arrived at home. Well, police also discovered that Scott had returned to the location where Tindall originally left her vehicle. That was when she left it back at those South High apartments, and where she probably got into the car with him. Now, Scott says he did so on the day she disappeared, and mysteriously, Scott ends up taking her vehicle to a different location in an attempt to hide it. This was all evidenced by the fact that the vehicle had been backed into a parking lot with other broken down vehicles in the area. And then, to further disguise the car, Scott removed the license plates and got rid of the keys. Well, by October 11th, police had enough evidence to warrant a search of a pond that was located just east of Patrick Scott's residence. They took out cadaver dogs, and those dogs searched the area with the landowner's permission. And an intriguing set of circumstances happened because 4 separate cadaver dogs alerted to decomposed human remains in and around the pond. They alerted, which means they usually sit or lay down, and that was an indication that they were smelling human remains. Police thought they had something of value, so they called in the Indiana State Police dive team, who feverishly searched the lake and were unable to determine anything of evidentiary value. And again, the case appeared to be grinding to a halt. Well, hey folks, we're talking about the case of Valerie Tindall, a missing 17-year-old from Arlington, Indiana. But before we continue, I want to just take a moment and remind you that by popular demand and at your request, choir practice is returning to Profiling Evil. Now, if you don't know what choir practice is all about, then you got to make sure you tune in so you catch up on what's happening. Now, you can do a little cyber snooping on the web and figure out what choir practice is and why it's so important to law enforcement, but I hope that you'll come and join us on the first Monday of every month. And this year, it's going to start off on January 1st, New Year's Day. I'm going to have a special guest with me, retired profiler and special agent from the FBI, Mark Safrick. Longtime friend, we've talked many times on this channel. We're going to be exploring some of the big cases that are going on and taking your messages and your calls and chatting with you individually. So make sure that you're tuning in for choir practice. But for now, let's get back to the case of Valerie Tindall. Confused by the negative search results after 4 separate cadaver dogs alerted on the pond, police kind of went back and recapped and studied their search tactics. And they realized that they might have overlooked a very intriguing fact. You see, on the day of the search, the wind was blowing in an easterly direction. And the closest area that police hadn't searched was Patrick Scott's home, which was actually located about 300 feet from the pond where the dogs alerted to human remains. Now, 300 feet is only the distance of an American football field. And this left cops wondering if it was possible that the dogs were picking up on a scent that originated on Scott's property. The cadaver dog handlers were questioned about the behavior of the dogs, and they further opined that the scent could have actually traveled the short distance through the air that was blowing eastward. And then, as it wafted across the water would actually hold or maintain the scent, causing the dogs to indicate where they did. You know, that kind of seems like a stretch to me, and it leaves me really scratching my head about why the dogs didn't kind of scent track toward Scott's home. much like my old Labrador Retriever used to do when we were out hunting pheasants, because the dog would smell into the wind and work toward a pheasant. Nonetheless, investigators conducted additionally topographic studies of the area, and they determined that it was possible that runoff water coming from Scott's yard could ultimately leach and make its way into the pond, strengthening their argument for the search warrant of Scott's property. Also, trying to justify the dogs alerting there. Again, think about that. 4 separate dogs indicated. Well, this gave investigators enough probable cause to conduct an aerial surveillance of the property, which was conducted on October 12th, 2023. And to their surprise, investigators discovered that there were multiple areas of obvious ground disturbance on the Scott property. In other words, they saw places that looked like somebody had been digging in the backyard. And further investigation into this guy's comings and goings revealed that Patrick Scott also, the day after Tindall disappeared, made a trip to the local Home Depot where he purchased 2x4 studs and 2 sheets of 4x8 plywood. Now that's really important, so keep that in mind. Now, with this information in hand, investigators felt confident enough to ask the court for a search warrant for Patrick Scott's property. The goal was pretty simple. It was to excavate and search the area in hopes of finding Valerie Tindall's remains. Well, a month later, on November 27th, multiple police agencies ascended on the Scott property and they conducted a search. Now, when digging in an area where there was a large mound of dirt, investigators discovered a large homemade box. And you guessed it, made out of plywood and 2x4s. Now, with the memory of Scott's purchase of the same kind of wood at Home Depot, their enthusiasm was starting to intensify. The box they uncovered was wrapped in a tarp, and it was longer than 5 feet. You can almost envision this, can't you? Resembling the structure of a coffin. Well, inside the box, they discovered a bunch of items in there, including miscellaneous forms of paperwork and notes and other kinds of things. Again, why would this guy be burying in a big solid box paperwork? But it also included VHS tapes, and that's really got me intrigued. Well, as investigators continued the dig, they uncovered another box which had a really strong odor of decaying flesh emanating from it. The box was manufactured in much the same fashion as the first box, and it resembled the wood that was purchased the day after Valerie disappeared. This box, though, was a little bit different because it was wrapped multiple times with a big tarp, but the pungent smell of decomposing flesh was incredibly evident to the responding officers. In fact, officers noted that this box was also covered with duct tape along the seams, probably in an attempt to reduce the chance of leakage and the smell. Officers opened the box and they discovered what appeared to be a human body wrapped in black plastic. The smell of human decomposition was overwhelming, and it became more pronounced as the officers removed layer after layer. Once the tarp was off, officers identified what appeared to be a human body, and sadly, it was consistent with that of Valerie Tindall. Now, in their minds, all doubt disappeared when they noticed the body had fingernails that were painted orange, and it was something that they immediately recognized from Facebook photos of Valerie Tindall. The coroner responded to the scene, and police took Patrick Scott into custody. He quickly surrendered. There was no fight, and he was placed under arrest. I want to take a moment and listen to the press conference after they recovered that body and just let you hear how that was announced. Of course, the family was notified just before the press conference.
Good afternoon. I'm Rush County Sheriff Alan Rice, and I want to thank everyone for being here today to help disseminate information on the case that has been followed by many across our community and state. Yesterday, my department, along with partners from the Rushville Police Department, FBI, U.S. Marshal Service, and others, conducted a significant investigation in the search of missing teen Valerie Tindall, who was reported missing June 8th in Arlington. We have been working tirelessly on this case since its inception, executing more than 50 search warrants and expanding countless man-hours in the effort of locating Valerie. Regretfully, during our search yesterday, we discovered human remains buried on a property in Arlington. This property belonged to Patrick Scott, who was identified earlier in the case as a person of interest. The remains have yet to be positively identified by the coroner, who will establish a cause and manner of death. Following the discovery of the body, Patrick Scott was arrested for murder and booked into the Rush County Jail. This is not the outcome we had all hoped for, but I want to stress to the public that this case is far from over. There is still much work to be done, and our focus will now shift to successful prosecution of anyone who may be involved. I would like to send my heartfelt condolences to Valerie's friends and family, and our community and the officers involved who have been affected by this case. Justice will be sought for Valerie. I've been asked many times throughout the course of this investigation, why is it taking so long? The amount of time required to bring this case closer to closure is not a reflection of the effort of my officers and others have put forth. This case has been a daily effort for investigators since June. It has been a profound impact on them, and I want to thank them for their tremendous diligence and professionalism. So thank you.
Well, police investigators interviewed Patrick Scott, and they listened intently as this guy started confessing to murdering Valerie Tindall. Still wondering what was unfolding around them, the press went over and started interviewing Valerie's parents. And this happened shortly after the police press conference. And they offered these remarks that I thought should be shared in this video. And so out of respect to them, I want to make sure we get their thoughts out about what happened. Let's listen in.
Folks, I mean, you were here at the press conference and listened to what they had to say. Where are you at right now? This has got to be unbelievable for your family.
Absolutely. I'm devastated. My daughter didn't deserve this. And we just want answers right now. We just want answers as to why. Why would you do this? Because her and him had a bond, like they were friends. And
So we thought.
Yeah.
She worked for him, right? They did.
She worked for him,
she did.
but she also hung out with his family, like his granddaughter was her friend, and we went places with them, me and him, and her and him, and family, like everybody went together.
For a long time. You guys
Yeah.
were family friends?
Yeah.
In the last 5 months, had you talked to him about her at all, or did you see them at all?
No, he ran in his house every time I tried to talk to him.
Well, actually the first week or so, I think it was the first week, right after we hung flyers. I think it was day 2, we went out and hung flyers, and as soon as we come home, they were there. And they kept coming over, you know, asking me if I was okay and telling us, oh, I'm sure she's fine, she'll be back home. I left at 17, that's what his wife kept telling me. I left at 17, and I said, yeah, but that was different. You left and got married. Your mom knew where you were. You didn't just vanish.
Did you know in your mother's heart this is not her running away, that this is something is my child?
I hoped, so I hung on to that. I wanted to believe that she did, but I didn't.
I was reading on Facebook some commentary that you folks had made about you were concerned at one point, though, that he had a tracker on her phone. Was that part of work?
She come home and told me that. She said something about he had placed her on his 360 plan. I didn't even know what that was. And she explained it to me, and I was like, why? Like, why are you on that? She said, I don't know, he just added me on it with his family because they're all on it. And I said, well, but you're not his kids or his wife or anything. He has no reason to even be tracking them as far as I'm concerned. I wouldn't track my family. It's not normal to me.
And did he used to call and say, hey, she's here, Dad, or she's...
Yeah, she's like, go visit boys. She didn't know on the internet.
She just
And I tried to get her to stop doing that because it's dangerous. And it didn't work. Come to find out it was the boss, not the boys.
Did he ever help search for her?
No.
No.
No, all they did was come to our yard and talk to us for hours together, talking to us.
His wife did admit that she drove around Shelbyville
Yeah, she drove around looking.
and looking for her. But
And she offered to print out, flyer,
the next day we found out that they had something to do with it.
And is it true that you, at one time, after Valerie disappeared, you saw him taking down his shed in the middle of the night?
I did not. My son-in-law and my daughter witnessed him doing that at 2 a.m.
And the neighbors.
I had somebody else verify it was 2 a.m. and I said, how do you know that? And she said, I video recorded it.
And is it also true that somebody, a family friend, heard him say to her, hey, we're going to meet for lunch, or we're going to go for lunch on that day?
That was a girl who lived at the apartments that he worked at. They were there working that Wednesday, which he didn't work on Wednesdays. When I come home from work, I said, she doesn't work Wednesdays, and he said, yeah, I know. So we just kind of assumed she told a little white lie and went to see a friend or a boy or something like that, like teenage kids do. Well, later I called him because she was supposedly at work, and he says, no, she didn't work. Well, later we find out from multiple people that, that's not the case. His story kept changing, that he went from not seeing her from the day before to he had seen her that day to she had actually worked, and I found that out from the girl that worked at the apartment. Her mother actually reached out to me. She's 20 years old, and she had 2 kids, and she told her mom, apparently confided in her mom, because I'm sure she didn't know what to do as a 20-year-old kid. So after her mom had given me the information, I went and immediately emailed Smallwood, which was the lead detective, and let him know. Of course, it's the holidays, so he wasn't in.
To know that she was found practically in your own backyard, I mean,
It's devastating.
Do you know how
Mind-blowing.
hard that was for me?
Yeah, mind-blowing.
I wanted to go over there so bad.
So much. Every day.
How are you still standing up?
I do not know.
It ain't easy. I've been up all night crying, went to the hospital crying.
Is she your oldest? Or
No, she's my middle child.
how would you describe her?
So sweet and smart,
Funny,
honey.
very intelligent.
I saw something you said she was getting her grades up. She was.
She
Great
went from
comment.
failing to getting A's and B's. I was so proud of her, but I never got to tell her
She
that.
even got a couple acceptance letters from college.
She was applying to college. You know what she wanted to do?
Pet man.
She wanted to be a vet.
Yeah, she loved animals.
And her schoolwork in her folder proved that. She had all kinds of paperwork filled out from schooling where she was studying animals.
Was it hard to hear? I mean, the authorities are standing up here and they're offering their sympathies, and yet they're not. They can't say. And I mean,
I understand on their behalf, I really do. They have guidelines just like we do when we go to work. If I go to work and I don't put on my safety glasses, I get written up, stuff like that. They have the same things to follow, so I try to be understanding of that. Yes, as a mother, I would have wanted answers within the first week, but logically, it's not possible.
But I mean, you know in your parents' heart that this is Valerie. Do you believe it?
I can't see it being anybody else. It just,
When she
like I said,
disappeared,
she would have reached
There
out.
was no media. A
Nothing.
car was parked at his work, and she's not a very quiet person. She loves the dog. She loves social media. She loved that
TikTok.
car.
She loved TikTok. She loved to do those with her sisters all the time. The fact that she hadn't reached out to her best friend or her sisters or anybody, that just told me that something was definitely wrong. That's not, she didn't run away. I didn't believe that for 1 minute really in my heart, but I wanted to, so.
I mean, it's been 6 months probably of not sleeping for you guys, heart probably not eating
It got
well.
worse the farther it went into it, especially after her 18th birthday.
Can't even keep a
Right off the
track of
bat, she
thought.
missed her sister's graduation. And she knew that was going to happen. I thought, well, I can't see Valerie doing that. And then her 18th birthday rolled around. We thought for sure she'd be home when she turns 18. No, and it just took everything down.
When was her birthday?
August 29th.
And she was going to be a senior this year.
Yep.
She was
Her last year of school.
at where, Rushville? Or
And I got even more upset because there was no reason to hide.
No.
You know,
We kept saying, like, if she's out there and she ran away, why don't she come home, or at least, like, call her sister?
It wasn't that
text
she
something.
wouldn't. She wouldn't do something. I mean,
No.
that wouldn't be like her.
No.
Yeah. And so now the move turns towards, I guess, justice. I mean, right there's
Absolutely.
people talk about closure and tragedy, but
There is
really,
none.
Yeah.
There's going to be a hole there forever. There was a hole there. We thought she was out there somewhere. There was a hole, and it's never going to be filled. Just like half your family's gone.
Anything else that you guys want to say? Dad?
I don't know how somebody could do anything like this. The man's a monster, and his wife needs to be prosecuted with her.
Absolutely.
She knew everything about it too, I'm sure.
His son, we was told to go clean his car when he turned himself in the first time. So, I honestly believe his whole family knew.
When he was charged with false informing or not giving the right story, did you guys say to yourself, and then especially like, wait, why is he not
yeah.
saying, why is his story
Then the
changing?
bells
a
started
lot.
going off, yeah.
Even before then, there
Definitely.
was just a lot of things just started popping up. Like she would, like I said, multiple times tell me, I was 17 when I left. I was like, why does she keep saying that? Then she had to point out the fact that Pat was coming home. As Valerie was leaving, they must have crossed paths. I'm like, why tell me that? Like, there's a lot of things just didn't add up to me.
Just, you tell she's hiding for him.
So will you guys be in court every time that he's
Absolutely.
there, that kind of thing?
You can, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it would take a little time to understand what really happened in this case. And much of the information that I'm going to share now comes from a police report, something that Valerie Tindall's family actually posted on their Facebook page. I don't know if the police department was very happy about that, but once it became public, I think it's fair to share. Now, it was there that I learned that after investigators read Patrick Scotty's Miranda rights, he agreed to waive his rights and talk to investigators. In that report, I learned that Scott murdered the teen inside of his home, and he kept her body there while his wife and family sat unknowingly just feet away. In fact, he made a big point of telling investigators that his wife had no idea what he had done. As the interview continued, Scott reportedly told the investigating officer that Tindall was trying to blackmail him into buying her a new vehicle, and that things, quote, got carried away. Well, some of this information, as I read it, sounded to me like Scott was living in a fantasy land, and that he was fabricating details in hopes that it might somehow minimize the aggravating circumstances of this case, and they are aggravating. Now, I'm going to be watching for your comments on this one, and especially in regard to this. I hope you'll take some time to weigh in and put your comments down below. As the interview continued, Scott shared more horrible detail. Scott then told investigators that this teenager, this victim, tried to seduce him. And he said, I wasn't going to have anything to do with that, taking this holier-than-thou stance. He stated that Valerie tried to undress herself, but he wouldn't let her. He further stated that there was a lot of pushing and shoving. Now, Scott says he was fearful that Valerie would somehow accuse him of doing something to her, and when she wouldn't stop trying to seduce him, he took his belt off, he put it around her neck, and he started tightening it. And he tightened it and tightened it until she was dead. Now, behaviorally, I find this really important information, and I hope law enforcement is really capitalizing on this. This argument really is troubling to me because all of this, according to Scott, happened in his bedroom, not his office, not the vehicle en route to his home, not the garage. It happened in his bedroom. And he was adamant that he and Valerie were not in any kind of sexual relationship. And he reiterated that she was trying to force herself upon him. So it brings up my second question. What do you think about this, folks? I mean, does it make sense to you behaviorally. I mean, think about it. Would you go into your bedroom with a teenager to discuss work? This is far more important than it's being treated in this case, and I hope it really becomes something important in the trial. Now, after the murder, Scott said that he sat there trying to figure out what he should do next. He knew that his family would be coming home soon, so he moved the body into his office until the next day. Now, I don't know what he did there, whether he stuffed it in the closet or somewhere else, but he moved her until he could dispose of her the following day. And then he spent the night with his family. First, he and his wife went over to Valerie Tindall's home, trying to comfort and console her parents. And then, with his wife and family, sat at home and watched TV all night. The next morning, Patrick Scott jumped in his vehicle and he went to Home Depot, where he purchased lumber and constructed two boxes that looked like coffins. He decided to take advantage of the hole that he had previously dug in his backyard, something that he was going to bury concrete pieces in, and put Valerie's body in the ground instead. Scott was then pressed by police about moving Valerie's car. Why did he do it? And he admitted that he moved it because there had been a witness to it, someone that saw her parking it and leaving with him, and he didn't want it left in that initial spot. He admitted that he removed the license plates from the vehicle and that he threw those into the river. And he also admitted to moving Valerie's vehicle to the nearby community of Berwick and walked back to South High Apartments, where he got into his vehicle and made his way home. Patrick Scott then offered some additional disturbing information. This one really bugged me. He remarked how Valerie fought as he murdered her. He said he couldn't remember how he wrapped the belt around her neck to kill her, but he did recall that he intensified the pressure until she stopped moving, and he didn't stop until he knew she was dead. He then admitted to wrapping her up in plastic, taping her up, and then how he put her in the office area, planning on how he would ultimately dispose of her. You know, I joined my friend Joe Scott Morgan on News Nation with Ashley Banfield to talk about this case. And the question that Ashley had for me dealt more with the contents that were found in the other box that was buried in alongside Valerie. There was paperwork and VHS tapes. And this gave me an opportunity to express my belief that this murder was not a planned event, but it was a disorganized mess created by an offender who was doing everything he could to try to clean up the disaster that he created. Let's listen into that interview.
Okay, I had a feeling you were going to say that. Mike King, let's go back underground and the other box that was found alongside the bigger box that was built for poor Valerie, and that's the VHS tapes. As an investigator, your spidey senses must have just gone off, knowing that he was trying to get rid of some video evidence of some kind. Tell me what your thoughts are on how that's going to play into this case.
I have a number of thoughts, Ashley, around those videotapes. Number one is, if an argument is he was getting rid of business records or other kinds of things, he could have certainly burned those or done a number of things to get rid of them. VHS gives you a timestamp in our lives. Even people that are kind of slow to move and progress are probably not using VHS today. So the real frightening part is if these happen to contain information or video of other kinds of crimes or pornography, other kinds of things, it's stepping back quite a few years in time. But the tenor of what's in those videotapes is going to be really important to the investigation from a number of perspectives, and behaviorally, it's going to teach us a lot. It might tell us the kind of preferential person, if, for instance, this is pornography or smut films or something that is really violent in nature. So it's going to be important for us to understand what the preferential side of his victim selection is, if in fact he's a repetitive kind of offender. But everything's kind of looking like this was something that got out of control. The disorganization, even the fact of he may have had a hole there, he may have burned down a building, but I think that was all something that he took advantage of and then used the hole to help him get away with this thing and try to bury things away. Again, he could have used that fire, though, to destroy the body and a whole bunch of evidence. So behaviorally, there's a whole lot going on. Hopefully the investigators are really keen to what they're finding in that information, because it's going to tell us what his mindset is. And once we know his mindset, then we can start determining what the real course of action was.
Maybe he thought that the box and all of its contents, meaning Valerie's box and the VHS tapes and documents, would all burn up in the fire. And maybe the garage collapsed in a way that the fire didn't get to what he thought was destroyed. But obviously the story is still extremely mysterious. We've got a lot of make it real quick, Mike. What's your last thought?
Yeah, I think the thing I think about here, Ashley, is that, or he was planning to go back and be able to revisit that spot and revisit the things that were hidden there. That to me is more important than just happen chance of, I'm hoping I can burn this down. He would have never put that kind of action into preparing that body and burying it that way.
It's unbelievable. Well, clearly there's a lot more to the story, so we're going to continue following it as soon as we find out about those videotapes, too. VHS. I mean, here we are, 2023. Joseph Scott Morgan, Mike King, thank you both. Really appreciate it.
Well, after confessing to the investigators, Patrick Scott was asked by the cops how he felt about things. His response, in my opinion, as expected, was selfish. He said that it felt really good to get all of this off of his chest. When asked if it bothered him that he took Valerie Tindall's life, he responded, quote, "Well, I wasn't too crazy about it," close quote. You know, those of you who have been watching Profiling Evil for some time will remember that I've often said that the things an offender says may not be as important as the comments that are never made. And this is one of those times when the comments that were never uttered from Patrick Scott, at least according to the police report, seem to be the most telling. Patrick Scott never said that he was sorry for taking Valerie Tindall's life. He never said that he's sorry that this family suffered and wondered and awoke to the horror of their child being murdered. And he never even said that he was sorry for the absolute shame and heartache that he brought on his own spouse and children. No, this was all about him. Well, this case is probably going to move through the criminal justice system rather quickly. You know, there are a number of lessons that we can learn about how to reduce our own personal risk from this case. And again, this isn't victim shaming at all. This is just learning from these events. This is a way in which maybe we can help our loved ones also understand how to keep their risk low. So I hope you'll go back and listen to my videos in the Academy series, especially my video on the victim risk continuum. I think you'll find it really helpful. And I hope that you'll put your comments below on this case. What are you feeling about it? Make sure you're responding to each other and make sure you're being kind. Now remember, you can find Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and of course, here on YouTube. And if you like audio podcasts, folks, please tune in to Profiling Evil Podcasts. You can find it on your favorite podcast platform. Now, don't forget, January 1st is the first live in the return of Profiling Evil's choir practice. And if you don't know what choir practice is, tune in and find out. You're going to love it. And you're going to have a chance to ask questions and maybe even interact and maybe even call in from time to time and visit with me and my guests. And for those of you who would like a little additional content, you got to have a little more information, stick around after the closing credits. I'm going to have my artificial intelligence friend here read the entire police report. That way, you're going to catch every bit of the information and you'll get it in a way that hopefully will be pretty understandable. So thanks for supporting Profiling Evil. We love it when you give us your thumbs up. We love it when you subscribe. So please do so. If you're interested in donating, you can do so on PayPal. And I'll put this little QR code up here. The donations certainly help us out. And then I'm going to also put up a link where you can reach out by email and talk to us. And I hope that you take advantage of that. And again, folks, I want to say thank you. And from all of us at Profiling Evil, we'll see you soon at the next crime scene.
On the date of June 7, 2023, Valerie Tindall advised her parents that she was leaving her residence to go to work. Tindall reportedly worked for her neighbor, who was identified as Patrick A. Scott, who was found to own a lawn mowing business, and he was additionally found to live behind her residence. Tindall left her residence and traveled to Shelbyville operating her Honda Accord. During the trip, Tindall traveled to South High Apartments located across from Shelbyville High School, where she met Patrick Scott. Patrick Scott proceeded to drive Tindall back to his residence and arrived there at approximately 12:59 p.m. Valerie Tindall was never seen from or heard from after this date. And her last known social media activity was discovered to be at 12:53 p.m., and was at the location of 1300 Block N 725W. During the early stages of this investigation, Patrick Scott was spoken to in regards to assisting in possibly knowing where Tindall was located. As this investigation progressed, it was learned that Scott was not being fully truthful. Scott initially advised law enforcement and Tindall's family that he had not seen Tindall, nor had she worked for him on the above date. When later confronted with evidence to prove otherwise, Scott changed his story and advised that he had driven Tindall to meet an unknown boy who she was dropped off with in Homer, Indiana. Scott on another date advised law enforcement that he brought Tindall all the way back to his residence, and he returned to work. Scott claimed on this date when he returned, Tindall was gone. Scott continually made reference to believing Tindall had ran away, and made reference to her father's abusive behaviors to her. Multiple search warrants were executed on electronic devices in this investigation, and it was learned that based on those, Scott returned to his residence at approximately 12:59 p.m. on June 7, 2023 with Tindall. Scott made numerous unusual moves that date involving not searching the internet like he normally does, and appears to deactivate a lot of the apps on his phone. On this date, however, it appears in the background of Scott's phone the Apple Health app was operating. This app began recording significant health activities at approximately 1:35 p.m. These activities were significant enough to activate this in the background of the phone. We additionally discovered in this investigation that Scott had returned to where Tindall's vehicle was originally parked, and he moved it to another location in what appears to be an attempt to hide it. The vehicle was backed into a parking lot with other broken down vehicles, and the license plates and keys were removed from the vehicle. It was later learned that the night that Tindall disappeared, Patrick Scott and his wife went to the Tindall's residence in an attempt to support the Tindall family. This was in the evening hours of June 7, 2023. On the date of October 2023, cadaver dogs were placed on a property located directly to the east of Scott's residence. This was completed under the property owner consent, and was completed due to a pond located on the property with close proximity to the last known location of Tindall. On this date, 4 separate cadaver dogs gave a positive indication to the presence of human decomposition on the pond. We requested assistance in searching this pond from the Indiana State Police dive team, who completed a dive on the pond, confirming that no one was located in the pond. On a later date, a sonar was placed on the pond, also confirming nothing was located in the pond. When speaking with the handlers for the cadaver dogs, we learned that water is known to hold odor. I was advised that it is possible that this could be associated with water runoff or could just be the scent from another location that the wind is carrying and the water is maintaining the odor. It should be noted on the date that this occurred the wind was coming from the direction of Patrick Scott's other property. Investigators additionally requested a topography study to be conducted which determined it is possible that the water runoff from Scott's property could drain into this pond. In obtaining further information from the applications Scott was found to utilize, we were able to determine that the date after Tindall went missing that Scott traveled to Home Depot in Greenfield where he made the purchase of 4 2x4s and 2 sheets of 4x8 OSB. On the date of October 12, 2023, a flyover was completed of the Scott's properties, during which time we were able to see on Scott's 2 properties multiple areas of obvious ground disturbance. Upon receiving this information with the other information obtained in this investigation, it was determined that investigators would apply for a search warrant to search this property to search for human remains as well as other items related to this investigation. On the date of November 27, 2023, multiple probable cause affidavits were submitted to Judge Hill of Rush Superior Court requesting multiple search warrants including for the search of Patrick Scott's properties. On the date of November 28, 2023, officers from multiple agencies converged on the properties for the execution of these search warrants. At the property, officers observed a large dirt pile with miscellaneous debris. During this time this area became a focus because of the large dirt mound and hole observed. This area began being dug by utilizing shovels, during which time officers discovered a large homemade box made out of OSB and 2x4s. This box was found to be wrapped in a tarp, and was discovered to be greater than 5 long. When opening this box, it was discovered that it contained miscellaneous paperwork as well as VHS tapes. Officers continued digging this area utilizing equipment. During this time a second box was revealed. When this box was first discovered, an odor emitted from this box that I know from my experience as an investigator to be commonly associated with decomposition. This box was also discovered to be wrapped in a tarp, was a long rectangular box. Officers continued to dig this box out, eventually removing a box that was found to be constructed with OSB and 2x4s that strikingly matched the first box. This box, however, was wrapped multiple times, and contained a strong odor of decomposition. Additionally observed on this box was duct tape in the seam. Upon opening this box, something wrapped in a black plastic was discovered. I instantly observed this object to be the size of a human, and instantly detected the odor of decomposition. This plastic was slowly opened, noting that it was taped and wrapped multiple times. Upon opening this plastic, human remains were discovered inside the box. I observed orange fingernails on these human remains instantly. Upon reviewing social media, we were able to determine on a photo with Tindall that on June 7, 2023, she had matching colored fingernails of that which I observed the remains to have. I contacted Rush County Coroner Brenda McMahon at approximately 4:45 p.m. notifying her of the discovery, at which time she advised she would be en route shortly. It was determined that Patrick Scott would be taken into custody for this investigation at that time. I advised Scott of his Miranda warning. Scott confirmed he understood his rights, and during the interview Patrick Scott admitted to killing Valerie Tindall on the date of June 7, 2023 at his residence. During the interview Patrick Scott advised the following in regards to this investigation. Prior to advising Scott of his Miranda warning, he advised me that his wife and daughter don't know nothing. I asked Scott what happened to Valerie. Scott advised Valerie got carried away. Scott advised Tindall tried to blackmail him into buying her a car. Scott advised Tindall thought she was going to seduce him, and it wasn't going to happen. Scott advised Tindall got carried away. Scott advised that wife doesn't know about it, and advised that no one does. Scott advised Tindall tried to seduce him, and he wasn't going to have it. I asked Scott what he did to Tindall, and he advised he strangled her with a belt. Scott advised he then moved Tindall into the office until the next day. Scott advised the belt is gone. Scott advised when he got home the next day he made that box. Scott advised the hole was already dug, but advised it wasn't dug for that, it was dug for concrete. I asked Scott what the other box was for, and he advised put bleep in. Scott advised they were by his bedroom when he strangled her, Scott denied him and Tindall being in a sexual relationship. Scott advised that Tindall was trying to come onto him, and Scott advised Tindall was going to tell people he was making moves on her. Scott advised I wasn't going to have it. Scott advised things got out of hand. Scott advised the belt was his, and was the one he was wearing. Scott advised that he was fighting Tindall off, and he took it and threw it around her. Scott advised Tindall had tried to take her clothes off, and he wasn't going to do it. Scott advised him and Tindall had a pushing and shoving thing. Scott advised after he took his belt off and advised I put it around her neck and I held onto it until she quit. I asked Scott what was going through his head at that time, and he advised he didn't know what to do with her. Scott advised he was trying to figure out what to do with her. Scott advised he held the belt on her until she quit moving. I asked Scott if he knew she was dead then and he advised I pretty much figured so. Scott advised the next day he built the box in the backyard. Scott advised he put Tindall in it the same day he built it. Scott advised he built the box the day after Tindall went missing, which would have been June 8, 2023. Scott initially claimed he already had the lumber for the box. Scott denied going to get lumber, and advised he always have scrap lumber laying around. I advised Scott of his purchases at Home Depot on the 8th, and he advised maybe I did. I asked Scott if he remembers doing that. He advised I could have. Scott confirmed he went to mow the cemetery on the 8th. Scott advised during that time Tindall was in the office, and advised he was the only person to have access in the office. I asked Scott when he got home on that date if anyone was home, and he advised no. I asked Scott if anyone was home on the 7th, and he advised Scott if he heard it, and Scott advised no, and advised that down there. I asked never came. Scott confirmed he drugged Tindall into the office, and claimed she was clothed. I asked Scott if she was clothed when he put her into the box, in which he advised she was. I asked Scott to tell me what Tindall had said about the car. Scott advised when her car broke down, if her dad couldn't get it running he would help her get another car, however it would be a cheap car. Scott advised that wasn't suiting her, and she was wanting a new car. I asked Scott where the belt he used, and he advised he didn't remember, however he still wore it after. Scott admitted to leaving Tindall in the office as the family went about their evening. Scott admitted that Tindall remained in the office throughout the night. I asked Scott why he moved the car, he advised because blank seen it. I asked Scott what he did with the license plate and keys, in which Scott advised they're gone. I threw them in a river. Scott claimed not to remember what revel. Scott denied wife going over to move the car. Scott advised he had parked his truck over there, and he got into the car and moved it over to Berwick. Then he walked back to South High Apartments. Scott denied anyone knowing anything, and advised he never told anyone anything. I spoke to Scott about him and wife going over and speaking with Tindall's family. Scott advised he didn't remember what they talked about. I asked Scott how this has been since for him, and asked him to explain to me how he has functioned like he has, and did he hate Tindall? Scott advised no, and advised they did all kinds of stuff together like going out to eat, taking them shopping, etc. I asked Scott why Tindall came back to his home that day due to her driving to Shelbyville. Scott advised that Tindall wanted to go back to the house, and advised she didn't give him a reason. I asked Scott if Tindall put up a good fight, and he advised well, a little bit. I asked Scott how he wrapped the belt, and he advised he didn't remember. Scott confirmed he held Tindall until she stopped moving, and he confirmed he knew she was dead. I asked Scott when he wrapped Tindall up, and he advised the next day, June 8th. Scott advised this was done on the office floor. Scott was unsure if Alex was home during this time. Scott confirmed he wrapped Tindall in whatever he had around there, and confirmed it was black plastic. He confirmed he wrapped her and taped her several times. Scott advised it was to get rid of her. Scott advised he just wrapped her up in plastic, and he put her in the box he built. Scott advised he took the box he built into the house, and he put her in the box in the house. Scott confirmed he screwed the box shut in the house. Scott then advised he took a two-wheel dolly, and hauled the box across to his other property. Scott confirmed the hole was already there, and confirmed it was deep enough when he got there. Scott then admitted to covering her up, and confirmed it was done with a shovel. Scott confirmed it was one of his shovels. I asked Scott about the other box, and he advised it had been there since July. I asked Scott what Tindall was saying when this was happening, and he advised nothing that I remember. I asked Scott if Tindall was struggling when he was strangling her and he advised yay. Scott advised he didn't say anything to her, and then made the statement, "I just knew she wasn't going to blackmail me." Scott advised Tindall was going to tell everyone he had his way with her, and that never happened. I asked Scott if his plan was to kill her, and he advised no, that just kind of happened. I asked him if it was because she was going to blackmail him and he advised yay. I asked Scott if this felt good getting this off his chest, and he advised I guess. I asked Scott if this bothered him that he killed Tindall and he advised well, I wasn't too crazy about it. This interview in its entirety will be forwarded with this report to the Rush County Prosecutor's Office. After the interview, Scott was taken into physical custody for the offense of murder. Scott was remanded to the custody of the Rush County Jail staff.